Now I should be on. Am I good, Ed? All right. Tell you, getting over being, I'll move this down a little bit. Getting over being ill feels a little bit like coming back from the dead, doesn't it? We've seen Jesus' death, his resurrection. He started to appear to some people. Who was the first person he appeared to? Mary Magdalene. And he's appeared to the apostles twice now as a group. He also appeared to, not in John, but who else did he appear to? Actually, prior to the first group. On a road to somewhere. Road to Emmaus. Peter and some other disciple were not sure. A number of appearances. Some to the women, some to the disciples, and all that kind of thing. And we've got a few more. We've got a couple more before he ascends. And to be honest, in preparing this lesson, there's next week, you'll see I'm skipping chapter 20 in the last two verses. And we're going to get those two, and that's going to be in the last couple verses of 21. That's going to be a wrap-up and summary next week. And then if you're still not bored with me, I'll be diving into another book, but we can have someone else get up here if you want. Bruce, I know you got some material ready to go, right? No? Okay. So in John chapter 20, how many times does Jesus say to the disciples, "Peace be with you"? What do you think, JC?
Well, knowing you, I would have said 0, but...
They always say that my students think I ask trick questions. It's 3 times. It is 3 times. On the first appearance, he stood among them, said, "Peace be with you." That's verse 19. And after he showed them his hands and stuff again, he says again, "Peace be with you." And then 8 days later, when he shows himself again inside the locked room, it's, "Peace be with you." Why do you think he has to say that 3 times? Twice in one meeting.
They're meeting somebody they just watched die. They're not
Yeah.
in a very peaceful state.
Yeah, they're not in a peaceful state, are they? They're upset. The scriptures say they were fearful that they might basically be next, right? They're meeting in a locked room. And so Jesus' message, does he know what we need and all the time? Yeah. So every time, the first words out of his mouth, the first 3 times he said something to them other than Peter's road to Emmaus was what? As a group, "Peace be with you." Peace. Peace. How can we have that peace? What does Philippians say about the peace of God? The things you have, because the things you have heard and learned and seen in me, right? Practice these things, and the God of peace, right? How can we have peace? Reading, studying, and doing. Right? Because, the idea of peace here, are we living, not that it's anything new, all right? Brian's doing Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. There's been turmoil in the world since time began. But for us in our lives, there seems to be an awful lot of turmoil, argumentation. What can we have? Right? All right, in this chapter, he's gonna. Is it unknown? None. They were small fish. That's 135 or 153. It was 153. This is one of those little curiosity things. Going, Lord, why this detail of the number of fish?
Because it was enough to break the nets.
Yeah. So evidently, it's in there. I don't know. We know it. We don't. Why we need to know it, I'm not sure. But we know the nets didn't break, and we'll get to that.
But fishermen would know.
Of that time, yeah.
At that time,
Yeah.
fishermen would know.
They would know. So it was 153. I was wondering with my reputation how many would have chosen B. But. All right. John 21, fishing, love, and following. Following Jesus. We pretty much know the story. It says, let's just read the first few verses. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples. Notice I did apostles and disciples there at the same time, the apostles. The disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, which is, of course, what? Sea of Galilee, same, just different name for it. Who was Tiberius? A Roman emperor. I'm not sure. He was a general at the time. Well, no, when John was written, he had been an emperor. At the time that these events happened, he was a general. But John was written later. After, correct me if I'm wrong, people who have studied this, I believe it was after the destruction of Jerusalem when the Gospel of John was written, which would have been involved Tiberius and all that. Okay. So, anyways, he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael, Cana of Cana in Galilee. What did Jesus say? What was Jesus' comment about Nathanael? Way back when. Yeah, he said he saw him by the tree, and what was a characteristic of Nathanael? No guile, in whom there is no guile. And so he's from Cana. Maybe he was at the wedding feast too. Don't know. And the sons of Zebedee, who are sons of thunder, James and John. And so they're back up in Galilee, as we see at the Sea of Tiberias. They've gone up there. They're still gathered together, right? They're still in groups. And Peter, in modern day, I think Peter had ADHD. What we call that. Could he sit still? No, Peter was not one to sit still. He was more impetuous. And so what do we got here? He goes, I'm going to go fishing. I'm putting my own inflection and tone on that. But I just get that feeling. They're sitting around, staring at each other. They got out of Jerusalem probably because of being fearful and of being arrested and so forth. They're back up in their home area, and it's like, I just can't sit here. I'm going fishing. And they said, we'll go with you. So they all got in the boat. We need something to do. And they got on the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Caught nothing. And so as dawn is breaking, as it says, just as day is breaking, the sun's about to rise. Now, I don't know, was that traditional, Steve? I don't know if you know this. Was it traditional for them to do fishing at night?
Yeah, they had to because the nets were real thick twine, not like we see nets. They didn't have that on them. So when we were there, that's what they talked about. They threw a real light nylon in just to demonstrate it. And, but the fish could see it, they just swim away.
Oh, okay. They do it at night.
You can't see it, you just gotta hope you find a fish.
Okay. So they did it at night because the fish were smart enough to avoid the nets during the day.
Might have a lantern hanging, to draw the fish. What do you rule about that?
And so Jesus appears on the shore. Yet the disciples don't quite know who it is. Now, maybe it's because of the dimness of the light, whatever. How far are they from shore? We know from later. How far is the boat from shore? Swimming distance. It's at 100 yards. All right? So it's like, what's that, a football field, right? Length of a football field, approximately 300 some feet. But they don't know who it is. That was Jesus at the time. And he said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" In other words, have you caught anything? Statement, what do you call him? Is he really that much older than them?
Depends on how you count his age.
Yeah. Well,
Earthly years.
but spiritually, what was something Jesus told the disciples not to refuse to let come to him? Do not refuse. Your children. Your children. Are we children? Yeah. Well, I mean, maturity-wise, spiritually compared to God, we're extremely mature. I mean, when Peter walked on the water and then sank and got back in the boat, what was it? "O ye of little faith." It's like, and so Jesus said, "Children, do you have any fish?" They go, "No." He said, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some." This is, and they find so many fish. This isn't the first time this kind of situation has happened with the disciples, is it? At least with Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Although Andrew doesn't say it's here at the moment. When Jesus asked them before about catching fish, that's when he came by. What did he say after that event? Going to make you fishers of men, right? When he asked them about going out and casting to catch more fish in that time, did they just do it, or were there questions? We've worked all night, right? There was hesitancy, wasn't there, in that initial Luke 5 one? Let's just go there real quick, because their reaction here is a little different. And chapter 5, verse 4, he said to one, and when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And what was Peter's answer? "Master, we toiled all night and took in nothing." In other words, this is foolish. This is a foolish thing to do, isn't it? We're fishermen. We know what we're doing. We've worked all night and weren't able to get anything. There was some faith here. He says, "But at your word, I will let down the nets." So there was a little, you sure you know what you're doing? Right? That's Luke 5. And of course, again, there was a haul of fish to where they were close to, nets were breaking again, right? So what happens here? Jesus says, "Put down the right side." Any hesitancy in the disciples now? No, what happens? He says, "Do this," and what did they do? They did it. Okay. There goes the nets. And?
Is there any significance in specifying the right side?
Not that I'm aware of.
Just guessing, the way the sun comes up, they run north and south of Galilee, so it's rising. He may have directed him, "Hey, choose the side that would be the hardest, and the fish would see everything."
Could be.
And that would be, like, in the shade of the boat, maybe you catch something.
Mm-hmm.
They would not be able to avoid the net. So you're making possible conditions, I think, is what Jesus is doing.
He's picking the whatever the size is going to be most challenging for catching fish. And what happens? They do it, so they cast it, and what? They couldn't haul it in because of the quantity of fish, which we know later is 153, not small fish, but large fish. So it comes full circle. When Jesus is getting them to first come and be his disciples and get them to follow him and to do all this, he does this, right? Come and I will make you fishers of men. Now what? They've gone through everything, crucifixion, the resurrection, they've seen him. They come back here and they're going to realize, and just as soon as this happens, John realizes who it is. It's this full circle, isn't it? This is where we started. Bring it back. Emphasizing what? He's going to make them, again, he doesn't say it here, but you're going to be what? Fishers of men. Brian.
I was just going to comment that a lot of times people will write, say that this is just a series of stories, but something fallible about detail is that if you're going to write a story, you're not going to put this kind of detail in. And this is right down to the number of fish, so therefore there would be witnesses.
Like, up till this point, they don't know it's Jesus. So some random guy is yelling at him from the shore, hey, you've been unsuccessful, why don't you throw it out the right side? If it were me, how about you mind your business? Being frustrated, not want to follow up, it's like, fine, we'll throw it out the right side of the boat. And then now all of a sudden, it's their eyes open, it's Jesus.
Do you think? Yeah, and I agree. It's sort of hard. But as they brought it, they throw it off and they bring in the fish. Do you think the memory of the first thing came flooding back?
I think to Brian's point and to your point, the reason we get the detail is because it's the second time. In my mind, the first time it happened, they probably told that story over the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And people had questions. And the second time, they're like, nope, we know exactly how far, we know exactly how many fish we caught, we know that the nets didn't break, we know this stuff. You're going to ask, and here we can actually tell them.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been 153 fish the first time. We don't know that number. There's just this realization. Now, what does this come from? What's our lesson for us here? Well, yeah. Do we go fishing under our own directions or under Jesus? How successful will we be in our fishing if we try to do it our own way? It's not going to happen. How successful can we be when we fish under Jesus' example and directions? That's when the blessings come in. What was when the children of Israel got the law and they had the reading of the law, right? And half of them on, Gerizim and Ebal? What were they read, and what did each side? What was each side? The blessings and the cursings. God said, what was there? When you do it my way, God says what? Blessings. When you don't do it my way, curses. Nothing new under the sun. God's the same forever, right? It comes full circle. They bring it in, and they have the success. Go to some of these. Jeremiah 10:23. We know this verse probably fairly well. I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, and that it is not in man who walks to directs his steps. If fishing is life, as we live our life, if we live it according to God's directions, blessings. Doesn't mean we don't have trials, but we have blessings. Proverbs 16. verses 1 through 3. The plans of the heart belong to a man. In James 4, 13 through 15, anyone remember what that one says? Talking about, come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will do such and such a thing, what? But instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. All right? Doing things according to God's direction. That's when success comes. Whether that was one of the lessons Jesus was trying to get to the disciples then, I don't know, but it's certainly a lesson I think we can apply to ourselves. And so with this, they have breakfast on the shore. Getting back to John. And I'm skipping over a little bit of it here. It says, verse 7, the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, said to Peter, it's the Lord. Now, whether he said this while the exact timing of when John said this, it's hard to say. But he said that, and John's the first to realize. And then Peter, realizing at the moment John says it, again, what does Peter do? Yeah, which, one of these little interesting trivia things says he put on his outer garment. I would think if you're going to go swimming, you would take off the outer garment. But I don't know, Peter put it on and swam the shore. The other disciples came in the boat dragging the net full of fish. Were they grumbling? There goes Peter, he's not helping. I don't know. There goes Peter again, not helping do the work. It doesn't say they did that, so I don't know. For they were not far from land, they were about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it. Miracle or not, hard to say. And bread. The peace be with you. Now Jesus is what? Taking care of their physical needs, isn't he? They've been working hard all night. Didn't catch anything. And so what's he do? He feeds them. Right? He feeds them. He says, bring some of the fish that you've just caught. So Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore. I can't imagine he did that himself, being it was so heavy. So Peter went back and helped, at least. Full of large fish, there's 100. Although there were so many, the net was not torn. Probably miraculous. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now here's the thing. Now none of the disciples dare ask him, who are you? Had they done that, had they had that thing before where they were fearful of asking Jesus something? We've seen that in Scripture before. They were afraid to ask Jesus a question. But they didn't dare ask him this because what? This wasn't that case. It wasn't fearful. They knew. They knew. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. Bread and fish. That emphasizing some other experiences that they've had. One thing, a thing in teaching, they call it spiraling. Spiraling in teaching is, you're talking about A here, but you go back and you review parts B, C, and D as you get back to A. So it's going back and Jesus was a master teacher. Keeps coming back, reminding, involving. He gave it to him. This was the third time Jesus revealed himself to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So he's teaching some lessons. And the feeding, I believe, is setting up what happens next. Because we have this, and we know we've, if there's importance to some of the differences in the terminology, I wasn't planning on talking about that today, the different forms of love that are used, phileo versus agape. That's what we have up there. Jesus said, "Do you love me more than these?" So that was the first question. It's a little different than the rest. There's a great debate among commentators on what the these is. And Peter answered with, "Yes, Lord, I love you, phileo you." And he's finished, and Jesus responds to that with what? As I have up there, feed my lambs, which is interesting. That feed comes from a word that means grazing, right? Take them out to the pasture and let them graze. And Jesus asked the second time. Now, because of the context of other things that happen here in John 21, such as chapter in verse 20, and as it says, Peter turned and saw the other disciple whom Jesus left following. So it seems as if Jesus pulled Peter aside and is walking along the shore with him, asking him these things. So as this is not done in front of what? The whole group to humiliate Peter or anything like that, is it? You probably know, Brian, as a manager, how do you deal with praise and correction?
Sandwich things.
Praise in public, correct in private. Right? There is start with good, give the correction, end with good.
And even when you do I was thinking more of the performance appraisal, you sandwich things where you praise what they've been doing well. Now, here's some areas I want you to work on, but you're really doing a good job here.
Mm-hmm.
You sandwich those things, and you're exactly right, though. Anytime you discipline somebody, it's always private. Or correct somebody.
And so this is a private thing with Peter, isn't it? And it happens 3 times. So what's the obvious connection here? He denied him 3 times. Jesus doesn't come out and say it, but is Peter getting the message? Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure he's getting the message. He knows what this is about. The 3 times, because it says the last time he was grieved. Where's it going? Peter is remembering what? I denied him 3 times.
But he's still not getting the full message, and because Jesus asked him if he had got me.
Yeah, I read one commentator that basically could be wrong, and we know the difference between phileo and agape, but in the context could have a similar meanings kind of thing. There is some fine differences, but perhaps not as big a difference as maybe we perceive in this context. Hard to say, but it could be. The response was a little different though on the second one. Do you love me? The same agape and phileo answer. And this one he doesn't say, he says tend my sheep, not feed my sheep. Which has the same kind of, if you're tending them, you're going to feed them. But it was a different word, that be you shepherding.
Well, a shepherd did more than just
Mm-hmm.
about it. He tended them, if they had sores or,
And then it was another, do you love me? And I didn't have the more than these. Sorry, I forgot to take that out. Copy and paste problem. And this one, he did another feed my lambs, back to the grazing. Let's use the message to Peter. Yeah, you stumbled. Yeah. Wrong. In fact, Peter knew when it happened, because what do we know from the Gospels? When Peter did the 3rd time of denial, it's what? They looked, right? Jesus looked at him. Eyes met. And Peter ran off, weeping, right? Sorrowful. And that's the word here for when Peter was, this third time, Peter's sorrowful. It's that grieving. He's gone, wow. You think Peter tried to forget about that? But was Jesus is using his failure, what? To build him back up, right? Did Jesus say, no, you deny me 3 times, you're out of here. Go away. Yeah, you messed up. Yeah, I mess up. What does Jesus want me to do? Get back up and go feed and tend the sheep. And I guess that's the challenging part for us, right? How easy is it when we mess up to want and sit and wallow in that misery? And what does Jesus want us to do? Get back up. Get to work. Jesus hadn't given up on them. And I think this is part of Peter's coming back to grips. Right? Peter, I want you to work for me. And he goes, Peter, it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough on you, Peter. Because he follows this up, feed my sheep, right? Tend my sheep, feed my sheep. That was verse, lost my track here. Verse 17. The last time it said Peter's grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And Peter said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him the one more time, feed my sheep. And in the same breath, he then starts going some more for stuff for Peter. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you to where you do not want to go. Now, we could speculate all day on what that means if we didn't have the next verse. John puts this in there, the inspiration. He said this to show by what kind of death he was, that's Peter, was to glorify God. Which traditionally, what's the secular tradition of Peter's death? What happened? Crucified upside down. Peter couldn't let himself be in the same exact way as Jesus. And again, what does Jesus say? He says, this is going to happen to you, Peter. And what does he say to Peter after saying that? Follow me. Bad things, you're going to have a rough life, Peter. Rough life things are going to happen in the future that's not going to be pleasant. Basically, Jesus has said what? You're going to die for me. And what's Jesus say following that? Follow me. Matthew 16, 24-28, that's where what? If anyone wants to follow me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. I'm going to be his disciple. That's rough. Brian, you're going to be persecuted and made fun of and lose your job and they're going to protest in front of your house like the Supreme Court justices and throw eggs at you and all this kind of stuff, and they're going to end up accidentally killing you. Follow me. That's the next one. That's the next slide. Goof. I found this picture just as a sort of what I get as the lesson here. Stop comparing your walk and just follow Jesus. Man, I can't lead songs like Kevin, or I can't preach like Steve or Brian, or I can't do this, and I'm just not as good, and blah, 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 blah. Stop it. Just Stop it. And that's basically the message of what Jesus gets across to Peter here. Because what is Peter? Peter says basically what? You told me I'm going to die in service to you. And as we see here in verse 20, Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John, following them. And verse 21 says, when Peter saw him, he turned and said to Jesus, after these things were said, what about this man? What about John? Is there still a little bit of that competition among the disciples? And this is a little form of rebuke here. What does Jesus say? If he remains until I come, what is that to you? It doesn't matter. Don't ask me what about John. That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter in my walk and following Jesus what happens to Brian or Jack or David or Steve or anyone. Doesn't matter. Ultimately, between me and God, doesn't matter. It doesn't. Right?
Brad, I'm reminded of your grandfather who used to say.
Are you gonna steal?
I'll leave it for you.
You're gonna steal something?
Okay, something Virgil used to say all the time.
Yeah. And what does he say again? He just got done saying, follow me. What is that to you? You follow me. Don't worry about John. Don't worry about it. Or anybody else. What does end of Hebrews says? Fixing our eyes on Jesus. I'm not fixing my eye on you, Bruce. Although we can be of great support to each other, it's what? And so, of course, being people, the saying came around is, John's going to live forever. There's still people today, that believe John is living somewhere in some hidden island or enclave or something.
The part that I take from this a little bit in today's world is the quality/equity, whatever way you want to look at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all, especially as Americans, are under this impression that Jesus should require the same from each of us. We should all expect the exact same reward, the exact same measure, by the exact same methods as each other. And so it's part of what I've raised my kids with, because they'll go, well, wait, why did they get away? I can't treat you all exactly the same. If I treated you the same as I treated them, they'd have completely different outcomes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Philippians, we're out of time, so I'm not going to go read it, but Philippians what does Paul say to the Philippians? Work out your own salvation. Doesn't mean we can't help edify and build each other up, but it's what? Is it my responsibility that Bruce gets to heaven? Technically, no. If I haven't done all I can to encourage, if I've neglected him as a brother, then that's one thing, right? That's something different. But it's even if I've neglected him, it's still his responsibility to get there. And so this is probably what you're referring to, Brian. I think Jeff has mentioned this. The Walkers are not here today because they're off worshiping. I forget. He didn't tell me where, but they're with his mother, and they're at another congregation this morning. My grandfather told this story, and I'll finish with this, called Hoe Your Own Row. And the story was this, that a farmer had some workers. They had a field to hoe, make the furrows, right, for planting. And to motivate the workers, he says, I challenge all the workers. I challenge you. Right? We're all going to line up here, and whoever finishes the row first has a reward. They're going, all right. The owner's an old man, so all the younger workers are going, all right, yeah, we can do this. Right? And so they all get their hoes, they line up, and they start doing the work. And the farmer, the owner, starts telling the story. as he does it. Just going along, telling the story. It's an engaging enough story that as it happens, the younger guys start looking up. So finally, he gets the farmer finishes and goes, "Well, I win. No one gets the prize," because he beat all of them across. And the moral of the story was, hoe your own row and tell your own story. It's the same kind of idea.
Counterpoint, or in addition to that, I had to pick beans when I was a kid. I hated it. But I tried, once I finally decided to work, I could get it done pretty fast. You know what your reward was? Get to do another row.
But the thing my grandfather told that, and I appreciate it, he was echoing this lesson of Jesus. Do your own work. Tell your own story. Fix your eyes on the goal. Don't worry so much about what everybody else is doing. And so Jesus finishes that with Peter's, and as it spread, they thought John would live forever because of that. And then there's just a couple of verses of chapter 21 John winds up with. So we're going to take the last two of 21, the last two of chapter 20, do our next week. Thank you very much.